Situation horrifying. 80% of town. RAZED. All hospitals destroyed or severely damaged. Have visited 2 provisional hospitals. Conditions indescribable. Fulls top. Bomb effects. Surprisingly severe. Many victims. Apparently recovering. Suddenly expiry. In fatal relapse owing to degeneration of white corpuscles and other internal injuries. Deaths occurring now in great numbers. More than 100,000 injured still in provisional hospitals in neighborhood. Grave. Shortage material, bandages, medicaments, stop. Appeal Allied High. Command asking supplies be parachuted immediately into center town. Urgently need large supplies, bandages, cotton wool, ointment for burns, sulfamides, blood plasma, and transfusion kits. Stop. Immediate action. Necessary. Also send Medical Investigation Commission. Report follows. Please acknowledge. Now that I had this documentary evidence, I got in touch on 3 September with the Supreme Command of the Allied Forces and requested, in the name of the ICRC, immediate aid in food and medical supplies for the Hiroshima victims. I offered to go there myself to organize relief operations, as I was the only doctor among the ICRC delegation in Japan. Some days later, the Supreme Allied Command responded generously to my request and informed me, through one of its high-ranking officers, that it will provide the ICRC delegation with 12 tons of medicines and medical equipment for the proposed relief operation, and that the material will be transported in 6 aircraft. A special commission made up of about 10 American experts, physicists, doctors, and a photographer, as well as 2 Japanese doctors, would also be on board. I was to accompany the commission and be responsible for the district, battalion, and supervision of the relief, which was given into the charge of our delegation in Japan. On September 8, 1945, we left for the airfield at Atsugi, where I boarded one of the aircraft together with several Americans. The flight was very pleasant. We soon left Mount Fuji behind us to starboard and arrived over the large cities of Osaka and Kobe. For 12 miles there was nothing but devastation. The sites where the cities had stood were an expanse of rusty iron. Everything seemed to have been devoured by the fire. Here and there, however, there were flimsy buildings still intact, making gray and black patches against the brick red. 271 myself peered anxiously through the windows and witnessed a sight totally unlike anything we had ever seen before. The center of the city was a sort of white patch, flattened and smooth like the palm of a hand. Nothing remained. The slightest trace of houses seemed to have disappeared. The white patch was about 2 kilometers in diameter. Around its edge was a red belt, marking the area where houses had burned, extending quite a long way further, difficult to judge from the airplane, covering almost all the rest of the city. It was an awesome sight. After having flown over the city several times, our plane landed with all the others at Iwakuni Airfield, about 20 miles from Hiroshima. We unloaded the medical supplies. Several Japanese officers came to greet us and showed us to a bus which was to take us to the Japanese military headquarters of Hiroshima. Moved after the city was bombed to a small hill 15 kilometers to the south. Contacts with the Japanese authorities. The bus started and limped along as best it could. The heat was tropical. The road, which had not been repaired for years, was in a pitiful state, and we were constantly thrown out of our seats. The engine groaned, and we were not at all surprised when we finally broke down in the middle of a village. We got out of the bus. People standing around on the street crowded together and stared at the American officers, whom they were seeing for the first time. It was a strange feeling. There we were, about a dozen men, all Americans apart from myself, and unarmed. The Allied troops had not yet occupied the country, and we knew that we were entirely at the mercy of these Japanese. With the mere order given by General MacArthur to guarantee the safeguard of the Technical Commission and to provide it with all assist ants needed to carry out its task be enough to protect us? I visualized one of our towns just subjected to a nuclear attack and tried to imagine the reception that the survivors would have given to a technical investigation commission sent by the enemy after imposing unconditional surrender. I feared the worst, but there was no incident. On the contrary, the village children came up to us and the Americans handed out several packets of candy and chocolate. In the background, the Japanese parents smiled faintly, sign of embarrassment, and the atmosphere seemed to be relaxed. However, the repairs took time and everyone was in a hurry to see the city. A military truck came along the road, and I suggested to the American general that we should requisition it to continue our journey to the Hiroshima military headquarters. One of our Japanese acted as interpreter, and after a brief discussion, we all climbed into the truck. After that, we soon arrived at the headquarters of the Japanese army. In the prefecture of Hiroshima, located on a small hill, there were several wooden army huts inside an enclosure, guarded by sentries armed with rifles. The duty officer yelled "Present arms" as we went by. The sentry saluted, and we were taken to a Japanese colonel and several officers. Introductions were made. Everyone behaved impeccably and shook hands. Well-trained orderlies brought tea, biscuits, and cigarettes. Maps were unfolded and explanations given as to the work the COM mission intended carrying out in the area. During this time, several Americans and Japanese took group photographs. Never at any time was there a feeling of hostility weighing on the party. Everything was conducted with perfect manners. This attitude on the part of the Japanese remained complete mystery to us. The Japanese people have a secret, unfathomable mentality. But deep down, these officers were obeying their emperor's orders. They bowed to the American officers, not because they were the vanquished, but because they had ceased fighting and reverted to their natural politeness. After having made plans to visit Hiroshima the next day, we were taken to the famous island of Miyajima, where the commission was to stay for a few days. This island is a sanctuary. We could see in the distance the famous 100-year-old portico, showing that an ancient temple stands there. We landed at sunset in a small village of fishermen and holiday makers. This island owes its fame to the pilgrimage that Japanese warriors used to make there before leaving for the front. They would ask the Buddhist monks to hand them the written reply to their wishes. If the reply was favorable, they kept the paper and the charm that went with it pressed tightly to their chest. If the prediction was unfavorable, they pinned it to one of the sacred trees surrounding the temple, hoping that they might thereby win the favor of a reluctant deity. All the Americans with me were delighted to experience their first evening of Japanese life. We were put up in small hotels in the pine woods. The floor of each bedroom was covered with a tatami, a mat of plaited straw, very soft and pleasant to walk on. Shoes had to be removed before entering. We were all handed kimonos to go and take a communal bath in a large pool. Several Americans made the classic mistake of the uninformed and threw themselves covered with soap into water, 273 to the horror of the Japanese staff. Indeed, the custom in Japan, and it is a lesson to us all, is to wash thoroughly with soap and then rinse it off before diving into the almost boiling water of the bath. During the evening, as we were talking together, I became friendly with Professor Tsuki, professor of surgery at the Imperial University of Tokyo. He told me the following story himself. In 1923, Professor Tsuki, then a young doctor at the Imperial University of Tokyo, was particularly interested in the function of Coolidge tubes, which the Japanese had just bought from the United States to treat cancer. Suddenly, he had a strange idea. He took a rabbit from the laboratory and at 9 o'clock in the evening, taking advantage of the staff's absence, he exposed his rabbit completely to the X-ray lamp in order to observe the massive effect of these new rays on living organisms. At 9.50, then 10 o'clock, The rabbit showed no signs of discomfort whatsoever. At 11 o'clock, the rabbit was still behaving normally and seemed perfectly alert. A doubt began to enter the young doctor's mind. At midnight, the rabbit gave no visible sign of any reaction. Dr. Tsuzuki switched off the apparatus, picked up the rabbit, put it on the carpet of his office, and lit a cigarette. He was just musing on this strange experiment, seemingly without results, when suddenly the rabbit went into convulsions and died at his feet. The young doctor could think of no explanation for this mysterious death. Tired and half asleep, he put the rabbit in the icebox to examine it later. The next morning, he told the story to his professor, who reprimanded him soundly, reproaching him for the futility of this experiment. He even pointed out that, in some countries, he would have been prosecuted for experimenting on live animals without good reason. However, this did not deter the Japanese doctor. Several days later, he began the autopsy on his rabbit and, to his amazement, observed hemorrhages and suffusions of blood throughout all the organs, the kidneys, lungs, heart, etc. His scientific curiosity was then stimulated even more. He repeated his experiments. In May 1926, his findings were disclosed at the 27 Annual Congress of the American Radiological Society in Detroit. They were published in the American Journal of Röntgenology, Radium Therapy and Nuclear Medicine in New York, and entitled Experimental Studies on the Biological Action of Hard Roentgen Rays. When his work was presented, it caused discussion. Today it is interesting to reread the thoughts expressed at the time by Dr. G. E. Fowler from Philadelphia. Here below is an account of what he said. It is naturally almost impossible for us to grasp in a few minutes the 274 significance of the facts revealed in all these experiments. However, as far as I can see, two ideas emerge from these facts. First of all, these experiments are based on the exposure of a whole animal to X-rays, and consequently, the observations made by Dr. Tsuzuki concerning effects on the various organs cannot be directly translated into clinical values, as we could apply them in routine clinical work, because we never expose the whole body of an individual. We limit exposure to a part of the body, to an organ, or to part of an organ. Secondly, by limiting exposure to part of an organ, the relative effects are obviously less. Otherwise, we would soon stop using radiotherapy, judging by the effects observed on the various organs. 25 years later, Dr. Masao Tsuzuki, who had since become professor at the Imperial University of Tokyo, was the man appointed by the Japanese government and later by the American authorities to study the effect of X-rays, not on the body of a rabbit, but on thousands of human beings, his own compatriots. His findings were almost identical to the observations he had made long before on the rabbit exposed to the rays of the Coolidge tube.